All right, good morning, everyone. We're sort of rapidly moving down scale here. We started off with a couple global talks and down to California, and now I'm going to talk about some lab studies. First, I'll just start off with a few background slides. I work for the Forest Service, and of course, one thing we're greatly interested in is the impacts of smoke on the environment, and we deal a lot with working with air regulators and also land managers who manage wildfires and also other aspects of the land in terms of getting rid of hazardous fuels and carrying out prescribed burns to manage ecosystems. And they rely on fire emission models and smoke models to manage and mitigate the public health effects of smoke and the social and regulatory impacts. And so just here, I've just put in a couple slides just to give everyone an idea of the kind of things we're interested in. In this case here, this is smoke from a large wildfire that impacted Atlanta. So we're interested in forecasting these acute effects of smoke on air quality that can have significant public health effects. Also, for an air regulatory perspective here, this is a map of non-attainment counties. The United States, smoke is a significant contributor, especially to PM 2.5. So accounting for that's very important when air regulators and air quality managers are trying to develop plans to meet attainment for EPA regulations and air quality standards. And then also some things a lot of people don't think about, but these more acute effects, this is the aftermath of a car wreck that occurred when smoke from prescribed fire went across an interstate. And it's actually can happen fairly often that every few years you'll see there's a significant multi-fatality accident, usually in the southeast, related to smoke. So we sort of really have several different aspects of smoke that land managers are worried about. Just a background, this is a fire emissions model, and we're just looking at the emissions part of it. Fire emissions are typically calculated or estimated by multiplying the burned area, measure the fuel consumed in the emission factor. And this study here, we're trying to determine how the emission factor varies in response to different fuel properties. The emission factor is influenced by the vegetation type, the fuel conditions, and meteorology as well, the weather conditions. And all of those aspects change the mix of flaming and smoldering combustion that occur in a fire. And just a little background here. So for the most part, the emissions are quite different from the flaming processes and the smoldering processes. For flaming, the combustion tends to be a lot more complete. We get a lot more carbon dioxide and less particulate matter, less VOCs, and less carbon monoxide. As moving to the sort of the smoldering processes, then we get a lot more of the VOCs and the particulate matter, the pollutants that we're concerned about in terms of air quality. And one way we quantify the mix of flaming and smoldering combustion is with the modified combustion efficiency, which is called MCE. This is simply the ratio of the carbon dioxide emitted to the sum of the carbon dioxide and carbon monoxide emitted. And so as the MCE approaches one that tends to be dominated by flaming combustion, and as smoldering combustion processes become more important, MCE decreases. And a lot of the species that are associated with smoldering combustion are highly correlated with MCE. So the MCE can be used to predict emissions for a lot of compounds, and in this case we show the sum of volatile organic compounds, the emission factors, how that increases with modified combustion efficiency. And this is just a quick figure here to show you an example of as you move along from a high combustion efficiency fire, this would be one like maybe a grass fire that's dominated by flaming combustion, to a fire with a lot more smoldering combustion. You see these large increases, and in this case, for example, the VOC emissions increased by a factor of 5 or so. Okay, so in general, the way that emissions are related to fuel bed properties. So we go from left to right, on the left being sort of the high MC, fires that are dominated by flaming combustion, moving over to lower MC, where smoldering combustion becomes more important. There's a few fuel properties that are related, the drier fuels, more flaming combustion, loosely packed fuels also, and then also the particle size, grasses and needles. These tend to burn more by flaming combustion, and as you increase the moisture content or the density of the fuel bed and the particle size, you tend to get more smoldering combustion. Okay, so in our study, we wanted to to look at how the bulk density of the fuel bed and the moisture content of the fuel bed affected the combustion efficiency and emissions of some of the key species, particulate, organic, the emissions of particulates and of carbon monoxide and methane. And in order to do this in a way that we could have a good control over the fuel bed properties, we started off by looking at ponderosa pine needles, which are a good proxy for litter in most conifer forests. And we constructed the carefully constructed fuel beds of ponderosa pine needles and varied the bulk density and or the moisture content. We conducted the experiments in the Missoula Fire Sciences Lab, and this is a little schematic of it. So we build we have a fuel bed down here, and above it is a large inverted funnel that sucks up the smoke. And up on the platform there, about 18 meters above the ground, we have set up our instruments and sampled the smoke. And the smoke's well mixed by the time it gets to the top. We measured our gases. We measured the main carbon-containing gases using cavity ring down spectrometry. We also measured particulate matter, organic carbon, elemental carbon, and also we had a measure of a so-called black carbon, which is actually just the absorption at 880 nanometers, but it's varies linearly with elemental carbon. So these are the species we monitored. We used the carbon mass balance method to calculate the emissions. And the main point here is just that even though we didn't measure the volatile organic compounds, since those typically account for less than 10% of the carbon, or even about 5%, this method will only have a small bias in not measuring those species. We looked at, for our treatments, we went through 3 bulk density, a low, a mid, and a high, and that was varied by doubling at each step. And then also moisture content, we'll call the dry, and that was about 5%. And the high moisture, referred to as the moist, is around 15 or 16% moisture content, so about a tripling. We also added a couple additional bulk densities, and we had a total of 72 burns. We used a relatively small fuel bed, about 1 square foot in 1 inch deep. And we selected these bulk densities for the litter, and that those were pretty representative of what's observed in forests. Okay, this is a plot of a typical data. On the left-hand side, that's the emissions of the carbon monoxide and carbon dioxide. The green trace is CO2. The red trace is CO. The black trace is a modified combustion efficiency. So what you can see as the fire starts, it's mostly flaming combustion, a lot of CO2, and then as smoldering begins to take over, you start to see a decrease in the CO2. The CO continues to increase, and the modified combustion efficiency drops out over the course of the fire. Okay, now for some quick results, just put together some box plots that look at the bulk density effect on the modified combustion efficiency. The left-hand side are the dry treatments, the right-hand side are the moist treatments, and they've been broken down into the low, mid, and high bulk densities. And in this case, you can see there's a clear, strong effect of the bulk density on the modified combustion efficiency, both for the dry and the moist treatments. And it's about what we had expected, the combustion efficiency decreasing as the bulk density increases. Similarly, for methane, a species which is associated with smoldering combustion, we again see what we expect. The emission factor for methane increases as the bulk density increases. And for particulate organic matter, again, a species associated with smoldering combustion, we see the same, although quite a bit more noisy, but it's sort of a similar trend. And as we go over to black carbon or soot is typically associated with flaming combustion. And in this case, you sort of see a little bit of the data's a lot more noisy, but you can still sort of see a bit of the opposite trend in that at the lower bulk densities is where we get the highest emissions, where the flaming combustion tends to dominate. And just to summarize the bulk density effects, we pretty much saw a significant effect of bulk density for all the gases at both the dry and moist treatments, and for the particulate matter also, although there were some, we compared these 1-to-1 using a Wilcoxon-Rank sum test. There were some combinations, for instance, the mid and high density fuel beds, we didn't see a significant difference for those for the black carbon. I think it was just the data was a little too noisy to pull that out, and we didn't have enough replicates. Overall, looking at the modified combustion efficiency against the bulk density, as for all the dry treatments here, you can see there's a very strong correlation between the two. And as the bulk density approaches 0, the intercept there is about 0.97, and that's coincidentally sort of about what you would see from a combustion efficiency for a savanna fire in the dry season. And then quickly, just a couple slides looking at the moisture content effect. So in this case, we've broken down the groups by the bulk density, the 3 bulk density treatments, and looked for a moisture effect. And in this case, we only see an effect as we get to the high bulk density. We don't really see an effect for the modified combustion efficiency at the lower bulk densities for the moisture, even though we're tripling the moisture content. And that varies a bit from some of what's been observed in previous lab studies. Again, for methane, a similar occurrence. At the lower bulk densities, we don't really see an effect, but at the high bulk density, we do. And the same thing, particulate matter. As we go on to the black carbon, it's in this case, it looks like we can see an effect across all bulk densities. As we increase the moisture, we reduce the soot production. And just a quick summary table here. We didn't really see any effect of, we only saw for the gas species and for the organic particulate matter, we only see an effect of moisture at the highest bulk densities examined, but for the soot, we see an effect at all bulk densities. And then overall, putting together all of our treatments to look at the methane dependence on modified combustion efficiency, and it's quite robust, and the regression numbers are similar to what's been observed, and we don't see any difference between the dry and the wet treatments, which tells us that the variability in the methane emission factor is pretty much driven mostly by the MC. There isn't sort of an independent effect of moisture content other than that's realized through the MC. However, in the case of particulate matter, we see for the moist and the dry conditions, the organic particulate matter, there's very different slopes for this relationship, a factor of 3 difference in the slope. So it tells us as we increase the moisture content, we see a very significant effect on the production of particulate organic matter. And then last slide here with the black carbon. It shows, again, the green here are the moist treatments, the yellow are the dry treatments, and you can see there's an obvious significant effect, although it's not necessarily linear, but we see an effect is at the high moisture contents. It really sort of impedes the production of soot. And so, yeah, just to finish up here, that we find that the combustion efficiency decreases with both bulk density and with moisture content at the highest bulk density as we expected. The methane emission factor, the variability is explained mostly by the MCE, and soot, we see increased moisture content significantly reduces the soot production across all bulk density treatments. And the implications for this is important because a lot of the models that are used to model smoke emissions to provide input for smoke emission modeling, or for smoke modeling to simulate the impacts of smoke on air quality, they use combustion models that assume litter burns almost exclusively by flaming combustion at a high MCE. And our results here show that that's not really the case. They tend to burn at a much lower MCE that's assumed. And as sort of a second note, our study showed that the results were very sensitive to the bulk density, and that's not always carefully controlled for in laboratory studies. And so that can really cause issues if a lab study for biomass burning doesn't carefully control for the bulk density. It might confound efforts to look for other effects like moisture. Thank you.
So we have time for questions.
I understand you have not addressed the wind effect on the combustion process. My question is, would you expect the wind, ambient wind, and the fire-driven wind to sort of counteract the bulk density impact on the consumption rates?
Yeah, yes, we would. We'd expect, if we take account for the wind, that you'd have better ventilation and a more vigorous fire and more flaming combustion. Yep, that would definitely offset it.
Any other questions?
Do you see pathways to integrate that information in models like Consume or other spatially explicit emission models?
Sorry. Yeah, I think we're working on getting some more replicates done so we can look at a higher fuel moisture content. But it looks like at least the effect of the bulk density, it seems fairly robust and linear. So I think we can probably work that in to the full FUM and Consume. And actually, we're working on that now. The moisture content seems a bit more complicated, and I'm not. So we'll have to see what happens once we go to higher moisture contents if we can get an effect that we can really model well.
One more question, sorry. Thank you for actually a really interesting talk. I think the data are very valuable. So I was just wondering if there could be a role for plant traits in terms of modulating bulk densities and whether or not you can integrate that into your experimental tests.
Well, you know, in this case, we're just looking at the litter, and that's really the litter fall is can be pretty variable. It tends to be related to the vegetation type, the forest type, like ponderosa pine and lodgepole pine, for instance, are two forest types found in the Rocky Mountains, but the difference in their bulk density is about a factor of 2. So that would be something that we could incorporate. Part of the problem with that is that those bulk densities can also be highly, even though those are average numbers, they can be highly variable, and they can vary by factors of 3 or 4 at any given site. But yeah, that's something that we would incorporate, accounting for the different bulk densities for the different forest types.
Great, thank you. Okay, so now we're going to switch gears and move from the land to the atmosphere. And our next speaker is Amber Soja, and she's going to be talking about Calliope-derived smoke plume injection height.